All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the second annual Fatherhood webinar hosted by the Society for Social Work and Research Fatherhood Special Interest Group. My name is Pajarita Charles. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Social Work at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. First, we'd like to say hello to all the fathers out there and to family members that are with us today, and to extend a special Happy Father's Day this coming weekend. Before we talk about our agenda, I'd like to acknowledge our co-sponsor, the Institute for Research on Poverty, for helping to make today possible, with a special shout out to Dave Chancellor, who's been providing really important and helpful tech support along the way. And then I want to extend a special thank you to the members of the Planning Committee for the Fatherhood Special Interest Group, without whom this webinar would not have been possible. So thanks to all of my partners. All right, so let's talk about how we're going to spend the next hour and a half together. So as many of you know from getting the information when you registered, the purpose of today's webinar is to share and discuss a diverse range of perspectives from the fatherhood field. We're going to focus on the experiences of fathers with a variety of identities and backgrounds, and talk about topics including race and ethnicity, residency, child support, and incarceration, to name a few. To give you a little bit of background, this conference was developed and organized by members of the Society for the Social Work and Research Special Interest Group on father-related research. This group has been meeting annually at our annual conference for the last several years. We have a growing membership, and we welcome new members to this group. So if you're interested in joining the Special Interest Group's email list, please email, and this is on your display. Please email grp-fatherhoodsig@group.txstate, as in texasstate.edu. That is also in the email list and text box on your screen. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Dr. David Pate, who is chair and associate professor at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee Helen Bader School of Social Welfare. Dr. Pate is an expert on low-income African-American men, fatherhood, and child support. He studies how Black men are affected by the social welfare system and the challenges that impede their ability to attain economic security. His research projects involve the use of qualitative research methods to examine life course events of African American men and boys. He also spent 16 years working as a practitioner in the Chicago area before becoming a researcher. We are so delighted and honored that he's joining us today to moderate this session. Thank you so much, Dr. Pate. So the plan is for Dr. Pate to moderate the panel with our four distinguished speakers, Mr. Ryan Bennett, Ms. Kimberly Dent, Mr. Michael Huesca, and Dr. Waldo Johnson. Each of them brings their own perspective that includes lived experience as a father, in the case of Mr. Bennett, as well as policy, practice, and research perspectives. Each of them has been tasked with starting us out with an opening remarks about either their experience as a father or the fathers that they work with or study for 3 to 5 minutes. After their remarks, Dr. Pate will then moderate the session with a variety of questions. Some of those questions include the ones that some of you who are listening today already entered when you registered. And then, as I indicated, you can also add additional questions into the chat box. We've dedicated 15 minutes at the end of the webinar for any new questions that have come up. And so, without further ado, I'll turn it over now to Dr. Pate. Again, thank you all so much for joining us today, and I think it will be a lively and important discussion.
Well, thank you, Paha, and welcome again to everyone who is here. We are so happy that so many of you have registered, and I can see the numbers are going up steadily of those who are signing on to be a part of this wonderful discussion. We have 4 esteemed scholars and practitioners and policymakers in our as part of our discussion today, and I'm looking very forward to being in discussion with them on the idea of what is fatherhood, how do we define fatherhood, where's the fatherhood field going, and what can we do to make sure that fathers are seen as a welcome and an important part of their children's lives going forward. Our first speaker for today is Ryan Bennett, and Ryan Bennett is a father. He's someone who has some firsthand experience with the child welfare system, And as someone who's been engaged in a program that I notice, I'm looking down to make sure I don't miss any of the important parts of people's introduction. He's part of the Partners in Partnership program, where you learn to navigate the child welfare system. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Mr. Bennett to talk about what that program is about and what's his role in terms of being a father and how he engages men. Thank you, Ryan.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, David. I appreciate that. First off, happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. I'm honored to be here. I appreciate that you guys, see the importance of having a father's perspective in forums like this. You're right, David. I have had firsthand experience. I had my own open case with the Department of Children and Family Services several years ago. And that was one of the most difficult things I have ever experienced. My own addiction had led me to a place where my wife and I were not considered, a safe home, and our infant was detained, which was, a devastating experience. So all of this fatherhood is very personal and professional for me at this point. When I went through my own experience navigating the child welfare system, it was scary. Having to comply with what the department was asking me to do, at the same time making major life changes in order to be the father that I needed to be for my children. That was extremely difficult, but I did it. I complied with the department, and I can tell you about that experience that it's scary. I know what parents experience, so when I'm out there helping parents, I can relate to it firsthand, and it's not easy. And I could also say, as a father, there were feelings of, am I relevant in this equation, or is my wife better off reunifying? Am I slowing the progress down? And I know that many fathers deal with that, and there are sometimes feelings that we're not even being considered in the same way that mothers are often being considered. So let me just fast forward a little bit and say that I did close my children's services case successfully, reunified with my children, and later was asked to join the Parents in Partnership program. So the Parents in Partnership program is a program within the Department of Children and Family Services, where we use our own experiences to help parents navigate the child welfare system. So we're able to step in and say, yes, I know what you're going through, and here's what worked for me. And then, of course, we educate them on the ins and outs, the jargon and stuff that goes along with child welfare, because it could be really confusing for families. Further than that, I'm really interested in helping fathers because I can relate. I'm still fathering children, and I can relate to their struggle, and I know that men need a safe place. So the Parents in Partnership program, I'm fortunate to work for them because they're very forward thinking and have allowed us, men that work within the program, to get involved with the Fatherhood Initiative. So years ago, we attended fatherhood trainings and learned how to facilitate fatherhood groups. We now facilitate those groups within the LA County jails and the communities here in LA County, and we're, of course, looking to expand that work. One thing I could say about the Department of Children and Family Services is, of course, there is a lot of work, to do and a long ways to go when it comes to engaging fathers and paternal relatives. But I'll tell you this much, a lot of that work has already begun, and we've come a long way from even what I remember when I had my open DCFS case. So that definitely gives me hope. The director of DCFS, Bobby D. Cagle, recently rolled out the Office of Equity under the leadership of Angela Parks Piles. And what's good about having the Office of Equity is they're looking at some of the disparities occurring within child welfare with African American and Black families, and under that umbrella is our fatherhood work. So our fatherhood work is really getting spearheaded amongst the administration within DCFS, and it's coming a long way. So that gives me hope. We're meeting regularly. We've rolled out what we call the Father Strong Initiative. We're beginning to recognize social workers that are doing what we call Father Strong work, and recognizing the importance of those kind of forward-thinking social workers that are asking, where's Dad? How do we get Dad involved? Where is the father's family? And so a lot of this is connected directly to the ERDD. The acronym stands for Eliminating Racial Disparities and Disproportionality. And we know that although it's not the only reason, fatherless homes are contributing to that, those disparities. And so this work has been really important to me. I'm honored to be here. I continue to do the work, and I'm here, and I'm an open book to answer any questions. I now have 12 years clean. Just so you guys know, I have seven children, 2 step kids, 3 biological and 2 adopted, but I call them all my kids. And fatherhood is really important. So I hope I didn't leave anything out, but thank you for letting me share with everybody.
Thank you for all those comments, Ryan. Our next speaker is Kimberly Dent, and she is currently the Executive Director of the Ohio Commission on Fatherhood with the Ohio Department of Jobs and Family Services. She brings over 20 years of experience in state government. She has been someone who has worked at the grassroots level as a caseworker doing work around child support, and has moved up through the ranks and has served as a consultant on a number of projects. And we're very happy to have her here to bring her policy perspective on how do we engage fathers. Welcome, Kimberly.
Thank you very much. And I also want to thank, everyone for this invitation. I think these conversations are so timely. I want to say Happy Father's Day to all of the amazing dads that are standing strong in their roles. And I want to thank Ryan. Ryan, you are the reason why I have the passion that I have. And so you guys may have to reel me in a little bit. I'm going to be very mindful of time because this definitely is something that I feel I was destined to call into doing. And so a little bit about the Commission on Fatherhood. The Commission on Fatherhood is a state agency. I am very proud to say OHIO is the only state that has a Commission on Fatherhood structured the way our commission is structured. And when I say that, I say we have been in state statutes, so we are in Ohio Revised Code 5101.34, so 5101.34. I'm sure a lot of you want to go out and take a look at that, like right now, but hold on a minute and let us get through this webinar. And we've been in there since 1999, and there are specific charges that the commission has, but the success of the commission is the support from the 3 branches of government. So I have a seat on the commission for the governor's designee. I have 4 members of the House, 2 senators, so 6 members of the General Assembly, and then also the Ohio Supreme Court. And then what really kind of draws it in is the fact that we have seats on the commission for the directors of departments where we will have like customers, such as Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, the Department of Youth Services, Department of Education, Mental Health and Addiction, the Department of Health, and then the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services, which is where I work, and that's where the Commission on Fatherhood is housed. And under that umbrella, you have child support, child protective services, Mr. Ryan, our benefits office, our TANF office, unemployment, which is really busy right now, and then workforce development. And so I think that the structure of the commission is so important to the success of the work that we do. And so I actually spoke at the International Fatherhood Conference last Wednesday, and that kind of came on my heart when I woke up that morning, that I really challenge states to take a look at their TANF funding, the unspent TANF funding. Now, there might not be so much unspent because of what COVID did to our society, but nonetheless, you can fund fatherhood under TANF purposes 3 and 4. And TANF purposes 3 and 4 are preventing unwanted pregnancy, and then 4 is advocating and promoting 2-parent families. And there's more that goes into it, but that's basically the high level. definition. And so with the charges that I have, 4 specific charges that I have, and I'm going to save the best one for last. We fund programs. Most of my money that I have in the budget, the state budget, goes toward funding programs. And so we go through the competitive bid process, and our programs provide services like parenting time, or parenting classes, and then co-parenting, healthy relationship classes, and then economic stability. And when we talk about economic stability, it's not just getting Dad a job. He's not just a paycheck, right? We want him to be job ready. So we want to ensure he's job ready and that we help him obtain employment and then maintain that employment. And then the third one is an awareness. I love public speaking. I love going out into the public and reminding folks. And sometimes it puzzles me why I have to remind folks, but there is this incredible role. It's very essential and critical to the success of our children that dads play. And as a mom of 3 and being absent, I was also, a product of father absence. And so again, having some issues with my life. And so we can talk about that later as well. But my fourth is policy recommendations, because make sense policies is what guides the work on the ground. So the boots on the ground and the feet on the street, we want to make sure that at our state and federal levels that policy makes sense. I really do believe that if we don't have policy in place that helps in what it is that we're trying to address in society, especially in our low income and impoverished neighborhoods, we're just missing the mark if we're not going to ensure that that policy makes sense. And so, we work with the State Office of Child Support to change how we compute child support. In Ohio, we worked with, there's a toolkit on our website that coincides with what Ryan was speaking about, which is how do we get child welfare workers that are mainly females to work with dads in the child welfare world. So again, I don't know, Mr. David Pate, please hold up if I am going over, but I can continue to talk more about what it is that we do. But if you go to our website, fatherhood.ohio.gov, there's so much information out there. I absolutely do welcome anyone contacting me afterward, sending an email if you want to set up some time to talk about what it is that we do. But I am very proud that we do have this commission that's lasted, over 20 years. And so thank you so much for the invitation, and I look forward to questions. So again, policy, make sense policy is what we need to focus on at the state and federal level so that folks can continue to work with amazing fathers like Mr. Ryan Bennett. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Kimberly. Our next speaker is Michael, and Michael, I'm going to apologize up front. I'm bad with names. Michael Huesca, is that correct? Oh, it's close. Is the Chief Executive Officer of the POPS Paternal Opportunities Programs and Services Organization. It's a nonprofit that advocates and evaluates the children's right to have equitable access to both biological parents. Michael has done a phenomenal amount of work by sitting on boards. He was a recipient of the American Bar Association's 2016 Unification Hero Award and the Father of the Year Award from the Fathers and Families Coalition of America in 2019. I'd like to welcome Michael to the platform to talk about his work as well, and from a practice perspective. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you for that introduction. So, one of the biggest things I want to say is, my work has been primarily working towards reducing and eliminating the implicit bias when it comes to fathers. Our society, our country has adopted a notion that children belong with mothers. And there has been implicit bias that have been implemented in our society that have systemically divided families in so many ways. And to be clear, if you are a black or brown father, you are in even graver concern and danger of being alienated from your child. So a lot of my work has been working with helping to reduce and hopefully eliminate that bias and recognize the value, as Ryan had mentioned, of having access, equitable access to both parents, and the importance of having healthy parents in our lives. That being said, you know, my work is fueled by my own life. I've been blessed to have both parents, my father and my mother, who've been celebrated 55 years. So I have had the benefit of having access to both parents. However, having access to both parents doesn't exclude me from having experienced things in different ways with a father who was not able to be emotionally connected, who had the idealistic ideas of working, that's all he had to do, and providing for families. And so what did that do to me, and how did that impact my life moving forward? I will tell you, like Ryan, I had an experience with child welfare. I am openly gay, and I did not come out until I was 31. At that time, my son was 5 years old, and I suffered a great deal of exposure by the agency that was punitive. There was an allegation after allegation in a custody battle that was made for sexual abuse. And I suffered for 2 years. I had over 27 investigations because the idea was that a gay man with a male child, something must be going on. And that was the presumption, that was the intent of their investigation. I absolutely believe that having a little bit of education and knowledge was a really big part of what kept me out of the system. So I just finished writing a book that will be released coming in October called A Father's Guide to Surviving the Child Welfare System. And this is a really important tool that will give fathers a handbook on the do's and don'ts as you survive this system. It also really tries to reflect and help us understand the systemic impact of having the child welfare, being in the child welfare system and the trauma that it causes. So acknowledging that, you know, we had somebody, Kimberly just talked about not having a father. I have had a father in my life, and the crazy thing that we have to recognize is that whether we have one or not have one, it impacts how we move forward. It impacts everything about what we do. And I want to share that, you know, today I do a lot of work with the tribal community, and I ran into a gentleman who, my first day up on the tribe, people warned me, he's very hot-headed, he's very temperamental, and he approached me and he said, I just want to let you know, I know a little bit about you, and what I know is that you're a good dad, and I want to be a good dad to my son. And he said, I didn't have a father. And he says, I know you're, you know, a little older than me, and I'm going to consider you a brother, but I may need to talk to you about some things. And that's what we want to continue to cultivate. We want to continue to be role models for our children and for our brothers and for all those who need it. So with that, David?
Thank you so much for sharing your personal story, and also thank you so much, and congratulations on your forthcoming book. I'm looking forward to reading that and hopefully sharing that with other people that I do my research with around the country. Our last speaker, before we get into our moderated discussion, is Dr. Waldo Johnson, who is an associate professor at the University of Chicago School of Social Service Administration. He is a well-known national and international author and scholar for his work on looking at young fathers as well as non-resident fathers and how they are involved with their children. He is currently the co-investigator of the Father-Son Communication Project, a Chapin Hall Center Joint Research Fund study at the University of Chicago, and he's someone who I've known for quite some time, and we were both frontline social workers in Chicago, and I welcome you, Waldo.
Thank you, Professor Pate. It's great to be here today, and I want to begin by saying In Carl Manza and Armand Perry's edited volume, Fatherhood in America, Social Work Perspectives on a Changing Society, they bridge the gap between research and intervention and policy practice, focus at the intersections of social work and sociology, psychology, family studies. They examine and engage scholars across a variety of disciplines and professions to focus on fatherhood, but they keep central in this volume the voices from the world of research, from fatherhood practice and intervention policy. And I want to acknowledge and commend the SWIR Special Interest Group on Fatherhood and their co-sponsor, the Institute for Research on Poverty, for this very important webinar. The idea of bringing together policy practitioners, practice practitioners, researchers, and fathers who are actively engaged in this work is simply the way in which we must think about moving forward. I want to center my opening comments on paternal involvement, and particularly paternal involvement in the way in which it is examined in fatherhood research. This is an area of family scholarship for which status and diversity have been slow to take hold or evolve. And I want for us also to consider the elephant in the room. The multiple challenges presented by COVID-19 present individual, family, and community functioning challenges that illuminate the racial, structural, and environmental inequities that characterize the everyday lives of so many fathers and their families, and especially those who are the focus of this, the implicit focus of this webinar. Men who encounter difficulty in enacting and successfully executing their paternal roles, such as the provider role, being nurturers and protectors, experience the challenges that the world is experiencing every day in their struggle to become fathers. And so I just want to highlight 3 points with respect to paternal involvement research. First of all, we can now safely say and have some agreement that paternal involvement looks different across fathering contexts. In Michael Lamb's reconceptualization or re-envisioning of fatherhood, as he talked about a multi-dimensional structure in which we might think about fatherhood, this also opens up possibilities for us to recognize that while the expectations around fatherhood with respect to being involved in providing financially, being nurturers, being protectors, may be constant, but the way in which those expectations unfold in various families and in various communities will differ. And we do ourselves a disservice when we are too structured in our expectations with respect to the way in which we envision outcomes to occur. Secondly, I want to highlight the notion that research strongly now supports the notion that non-resident status does not predict paternal non-involvement. And this is simply to say that we are challenged in our ways of conceptualizing fatherhood, understanding it, assessing it, in terms of thinking about the degree to which fatherhood involvement or father involvement occurs across different types of residential contexts. There are many fathers who are outside of their home. We all too often focus on those who are outside of the home because of their non-resident status or they're unwed, but we must also consider that there are a range of other circumstances that also contribute to father absence. But we are also now much more informed in ways that we understand the difference between presence and involvement. And so we have to also be much more attentive to thinking about the ways in which this can occur. And finally, I'd like to state that when we think about fathers and we think about the way in which fatherhood involvement occurs, let us be mindful of the fact that context and environment contribute greatly to paternal role enactment and performance. And I'd like to perhaps come back to this conversation a bit more when we began the discussion led by Professor Pate. But once again, I'm very delighted to join this panel for today's webinar.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. I want to say before we get started in our moderated conversation, I wrote down a few notes, and of course you guys have now made me change some of my questions because I now have other questions, but I'll try to keep it simple. But the one thing I wanted to bring up in another context in the way that Dr. Johnson brought up was the whole context of what we're going through and thinking about particularly George Floyd. And I was reading the book recently, the book by Ta-Nehisi Coates, Between the World and Me. And in the first part of that book, he's writing to his son about what he has to deal with as a father. And I'm going to read you a very small passage from there that kind of leads into some of the discussion and questions I have. He writes, I write you in your 15th year. I'm writing you because this was the year you saw Eric Gardner choked to death for selling cigarettes, because you know now that Renisha McBride was shot for seeking help, that John Crawford was shot down for browsing in a department store, and you have seen men in a uniform drive by and murder Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old child whom they were oath-bound to protect. And you have seen men in the same uniforms plumble a Marlene Pinnock, someone's grandmother on the side of a road. And you know now, if you did not know before, that the police departments of your country have been endowed with the authority to destroy your body. It does not matter if the destruction is the result of an unfortunate overreaction. It does not matter if it originates in a misunderstanding. It does not matter if the destruction springs from a foolish policy. Sell cigarettes without the proper authority and your body can be destroyed. You sent the people trying to entrap your body and it can be destroyed. Turn into a dark stairwell and your body can be destroyed. And what he made me think was that as a father of two young children to me, but they're 30 and 27, so they're not as young as I wanted to think they are. As a father of two children, I have to always think about how do I ensure their safety? How do I ensure that they're doing okay? And as someone who was a practitioner and worked with many fathers, I was always hoping to be that person who would make sure they were able to experience the joy I had as being a father, who could come home and see my children and buy them gifts and take them on trips and see their smiles when I did the smallest things on a regular basis. But I know that for so many men, that's not the possibility. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to do this work, because I really think everyone should have the possibilities explored and attained to be involved with their children and in the ways that they can possibly be involved with their children. Which leads me to my first question for my panel is, how do you define the occupation of fatherhood in your work? How do you define what it means to be a father? We have terms for the occupation of motherhood, and we often do refer to it as an occupation. But how would you define, based on your work from a practice, policy, research perspective, how has fatherhood been defined as an occupation, or what do you think it is? Who wants to be the first to go? Should I call on someone, or should I let you just all
Right.
talk?
You can,
Ryan, I'm going to go.
do you want to call on folks,
okay,
or
Kim.
can we just...
Okay, Kim. Go ahead, Kim. I'll let you go.
And I'm so glad, and I love this question because I believe that that's one of the issues. We should not, we should let dad define the type of dad he wants to be. fatherhood, like motherhood, it's not one size fits all. It's not a cookie cutter kind of a job that you apply for and you get paid for, so forth and so on. It evolves. And so I've never heard the occupation of fatherhood. I really like that. I might have to steal that from you, Dr. Pate. But
I have a published paper.
I'm so happy
on it.
Good stuff. Good stuff. I like that. And so for me, and I'm so glad that you said what you did, because we have a son, and so I know I had mentioned at the very beginning that I am a product of father absence, and I have 2 failed marriages, and so I speak very candidly and I'm very transparent. And I have 33, 25, and then a son that will be 20. So the 2 older ones are girls. And so when the father of my children and I, when we divorced, our son was 5. And I panicked because he is a young, African-American 5-year-old that has to get to manhood. And that's not something I can do by myself. I need his dad for that. And so I feel as though trying to kind of, put the definition or structure fatherhood, it can be kind of, we have to be careful with that. We just have to be careful with it, because what I had to do as mom is I had to recognize the fact that dad is important, and that for our daughters as well, but more so for our son, because I don't have that experience of being a male, especially an African-American male in the United States, and that's his dad's job. So I just feel that the occupation of fatherhood has to be defined by dad, what type of father he wants to be to his child.
Anyone else? Thank you.
Thank you.
Ryan. Ryan?
Yeah, I agree with what Kim said. The father has to define his role, and so the way that we typically encourage fathers, we haven't used that term either, Dave, the occupation of fatherhood, but I like that. The way we encourage them is to keep 2 things in mind. One is that you're fathering in a way that as a role model that shows your sons what it means to be a man, and to show your daughters the type of man that they would be looking out for. So we kind of keep those things in mind, that it's you're the role model, and so you define that however you see fit. But just keep in mind that your kids are looking up to you, and so we try to encourage dads to be the best role model they can be, in the way they define that, we leave it up to them.
Yeah, and
Michael or Waldo, do you want to respond to that? Because I have another question.
yeah, I do have to agree. I do have to agree. The definition should come from, the father. And, I think that one of the things we have to be mindful of is that, our children don't come with a handbook. We know that, right? And so it is an evolving experience. What I did as a 25-year-old father, I'm not doing as a 50-year-old father. And I really have to embrace that evolution and realize, that my role as a father is always going to be there, but it just evolves. And, I find myself trying to be less fathering and scolding or judgmental or of that point, and really having to step back and be supportive and say, well, how can I help you? So that evolution, I think, is really a part of the definition.
I'll just add quickly that I agree with my fellow panelists that it is in many ways determined by the fathers, but I also think that some of the ways in which fathers come to identify that occupation is also imposed on them by society and, in many instances, the environments in which they live. So with respect to the research study that David referenced, the father and son communication study, my colleagues and I have been, over the last couple of years, doing interviews with African-American fathers and their adolescent sons to find out the ways, to learn about the ways in which the fathers communicate with their sons about being safe, whether it's being safe from community violence or being safe from escalating interactions with law enforcement or even to be safe from racial violence. And one of the things when we think about disengagement, I mean, the whole idea about a conversation that Black fathers have with their sons, didn't really come to, to the recognition of the larger society until we began to see an increased number of young Black males dying after having interactions with law enforcement, perhaps the first noticeable one being the Trayvon Martin case. But within the African American community, this is well known. It doesn't matter what kind of household you grow up in, whether it's an upper middle class or whether you're at poverty level, whether it's rural or suburban or urban. Black parents, and in many instances Black fathers, recognize it is very important that their sons, and increasingly their daughters, but definitely their sons, be oriented to the ways in which they have to learn to navigate society. And so not to do that would be a failure on the part of a Black father. But that's unique to that particular, to African Americans and maybe other groups, subgroups, that are also growing up in similar kinds of settings. So that is the reason why I argue that in addition to fathers determining what the occupation of fatherhood would be, some of it is imposed upon them.
Thank you so much for all those comments. You brought, Dr. Johnson, you brought up a point that I want to go further into, and it's looking at issues of race and sexuality, because we often have placed the whole idea of fatherhood in a heteronormative type of way, where we look at mom and dad being a woman and a man, and also in the fatherhood field, I tend to think of it as from my perspective as a former practitioner, is that we were primarily focused on Black men in terms of a responsible fatherhood program, which I've always had some problems with that term, I have to admit. Because the counterfactual is that he's not responsible, and we're making some assumptions there. So I would like to hear you talk about, in a heteronormative place that we look at fatherhood, and also from a racialized lens, is there something different in terms of serving Black or Latinx or white fathers versus someone who identifies as heterosexual versus queer? But I mean, is there something there that we could learn from the whole idea of delivering services to men who have those identities? Any of you can speak.
Hello, it's me again.
Okay,
David. Okay. I'm so glad you asked that question. My goodness, we were talking about this earlier today on another call. And with the programs that we fund here in Ohio, it's about meeting folks where they are. You have to be culturally competent, right? You have to understand you cannot bring your biases into this work, because at the end of the day, this is a family, this is a father, and as the extension of that father, there is a child. And the child is looking for love, right? We know how kids spell love, T-I-M-E, right? And so regardless of, your ethnicity or, your gender affiliation, so forth and so on, it does not matter. We have to be ready to serve fathers and families that need our services. And so being culturally competent and not in a non-judgmental, environment, we have to be prepared to provide these services. And I was speaking with someone, we are focusing a lot on infant mortality here in Ohio because Black babies die at about 3 times the rate of Caucasian babies here in Ohio. And there are 9 specific counties that kind of have a contribution to this high infant mortality in Ohio out of 88 counties. And one of the motherhood programs I spoke with yesterday, she says, Kim, get ready, because this shelter in place has really kind of brought a lot of pregnant women coming through her door. 10 a week she's enrolling into her classes, and she had her first transgender male pregnant person. I hope I said that correctly. I apologize if I did not. But she said, this is a person that is struggling with their sexual identity, with trying to transition, but also pregnant. And so what do? We have to acknowledge the differences and the diversity of people, and we have to be ready to serve them with open arms, because at the end of the day, there's going to be a child, and that child will be loved nonetheless.
Thank you. Anyone else want to respond to the question? Ryan? Ryan?
Yeah, I really like what Kim has said about meeting the fathers where they are, because that's something that we try to do. And I really like the idea of cultural humility, where no matter how much I learn about culture, I will never know enough to be an expert. So I have to be humble enough to just say, I don't know, but I'm willing to know. And you're right about the hetero what was the word?
Being too academic, heterosexual.
Well, no.
Yeah, normative, but go ahead.
Yeah, I have to even watch my own language and catch myself and learn what's appropriate and how to address fathers in an appropriate way and help them cope with some of the situations that they're dealing with their own children, and embrace them and in those challenges and how they meet the world. So I think just being open and willing to learn is the best strategy, in my opinion.
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, and I would say, sorry about that, I would say, you know, what Dr. Johnson said earlier on the previous comment is relevant here too. You know, as a gay male leading a men's group, I'm conscious that if I walked in and said, hey guys, I'm a gay male leading this group, I want to tell you how to be a father, how many of them would want to hear what I have to say? How many of them would receive me in the same way? You know, and that's something that I am very mindful of. On that side, on the flip side of that, you know, one of the things that I absolutely try to encourage is, especially as a father, is to take the time to have these difficult conversations with my children. Because, you know, my parents said, we shouldn't talk about this. My parents avoided those conversations. And that's a you know, societal viewpoint. In my culture, that's what families did. You didn't talk about those things. It was taboo. You didn't, you know, address them. You were sometimes suggested that you were supporting the wrong thing if you were talking about it, or you were trying to be open-minded or considerate about this. And so, you know, my home is in San Diego. My son, my youngest, is 25, and he opened a bar that was very close to the riots. And in fact, his bar was damaged during the riots. And, you know, I will say he's my legacy, and here's one of the stories as to why. He called me. We both agreed we were going to go down, and we were going to fix the glass that was broken. And he said to me, he said, Dad, I didn't know where he was coming from this, you know, what he was feeling. You know, he worked hard and his property was damaged. When we get there, neither of us said anything. We were putting up the glass. And finally I said, well, son, you know, I'm sure the insurance is going to cover it. And he said, I don't care. He said, if this is what it's going to take to elevate the voices that need to be elevated, let them break the glass. And I thought, as a father, that comes from conversation. That comes from really digging deep and having deep conversations early on. And I think that's something we certainly have to elevate here, is having those uncomfortable conversations and acknowledging what systemically and societal viewpoints, how those impact our conversations as well.
Thank you. Waldo, do you want to say anything, or should I move on? No?
I think that my fellow panelists have given great responses to your question.
Great, thank you.
Move
I want to make sure I respect all of your comments. So moving forward, in terms of the work that you do, particularly Dr. Johnson, and looking at young men and fathers coming to work, what are some of the challenges that you hear that the men present? I'm not sure, is your sample primarily Black, or is it a mixed sample of by race?
So my study is, recent studies are all African American fathers. As I'm thinking about, I mean, we've been interested in also trying to understand, you know, what, if any, unique challenges these men may be experiencing in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. And while we, you know, because of our B, we haven't had the opportunity to actually go and do interviews and organize ourselves in ways where we can actually solicit information from them. You know, we have a fairly good sense in terms of kind of thinking about many of the challenges that these men present on a daily basis, and just thinking about that and thinking about the ways in which those particular issues might be even more illuminated becomes of great importance. So even if you think about this from an individual standpoint, you know, even with many of the public health advisories around sheltering in place and wearing the mask and social distancing, many of these things, you know, as one of my colleagues at the university, Robert Vargas, and another colleague talked about in an op-ed, are rather individually focused approaches, even though many of them you're expected to do those, because we also know that these advisories contribute to keeping other people safe. But they also impose in some ways, economic expectations, purchasing masks, you know, for not only for oneself, if in fact you're going out to go to work, which many African Americans, if in fact they have jobs, they're much more likely to have jobs that will not allow them to shelter in place or to be able to do their work from home. They tend to work in more public-facing jobs. So there's not only the elevated threat of being in close contact with people who may have the virus or symptoms of the virus, but when they are out, when they come back into their spaces, they're potentially placing their families, you know, at risk. But the choice of doing so versus not doing so, and potentially losing employment at a moment where unemployment rates are extremely high, you know, doesn't leave them with lots of options. And so there are a number of things that we can just kind of think about if we think in terms of the challenges that many Black fathers, you know, experience in their efforts to be, as you raised the concern, responsible fathers, or being really engaged with respect to involvement. And many of those issues and many of those concerns and many of those endeavors have really been exposed in the wake of the pandemic, you know, such that as everyone now is experiencing these concerns, these particular fathers and their families are just feeling the weight even more so, because as the squeeze occurs across society, these are among the people who are most likely to be squeezed even further.
And you raised a good point, because the one thing I wanted to ask Michael and Ryan, I think they talked about working with Native fathers as well as Latinx fathers. And if you look at some of the issues around indigenous folks who have been treated unfairly and harmed, and there has to be a father, and there's certain limitations to what they are able to do or challenges, as well as those who are dealing with issues of ICE. Have you had to deal with that in terms of any of delivery of services for fathers around, particularly in the child welfare system, where people are being deported? and then now what happens to their child? Have you, Ryan or Michael, have you dealt with any of that in
Yes,
terms of your work you've been doing with fathers?
I have had to do that. And so, I am actually about 40 minutes from the border. And I actually go across the border and meet with fathers who have been deported and try to work with that component. Interestingly enough, I mean, we just reunified a child with a father who was not of legal status, and the question came up, well, what would happen if the father was deported? And the court made the position, we're not going to consider that because it's not an issue at this moment, and he's being, he's here. The child knows him, the child's in his life, the child needs to be with him, and so they allowed the father to reunify with that child and keep that child. It is a concern, it is a challenge. I think that, here at the reservation we have an interesting change coming. There is a movement where younger and younger men are stepping up saying, I want to be there and I want to be involved, recognizing their value and the importance. And many of them are coming back from their own experience of a lack of having a father in their life. So I do see that as a culture change. What I find myself doing on the reservation is talking to the women about how to embrace a father, because that's a challenge, and I'm tired of hearing, and I'm reminding them, I'm tired of hearing about what a deadbeat this one was, or deadbeat this and deadbeat that. Let's get rid of that language, because that is not who we're dealing with today, right here. He's saying he wants to be here, he's present. Let's acknowledge and embrace that.
One of the things that I think is important to kind of go to is my first question was around the whole idea of how we define the occupation of fatherhood, and in some of my earlier work, I really focused on child support, because the fatherhood to me was defined as a financial provider. And I do think still that idea, and I'll love to hear from the panel, you still do see this whole role of men as the breadwinner, as the one who, in many a rap song and R&B song that I listen to, ain't nothing going on but the rent, and I want to have some rent paid, is one of the real things that we hear about. And so I was going to go to Kimberly. I know you've done some work with child support. I know that you I've read your report, and you were pretty, you report very proudly how much money you've collected in child support. And what role do you think child support plays in fathers' involvement or non-involvement?
Well, thank you for that question. Yes, because I was a mom that did receive child support. But, for me, I think that child support is kind of secondary to the father-child relationship. I feel as though if we focus more on removing barriers for dads so that they can be with their children, child support will be as seamless as breathing. I think it'll just be something that'll just naturally occur. And the reason why I say that is because, I've actually presented in all of the state prisons here in Ohio. And I remember one particular incarcerated adult that came up to me after the presentation, and he said, Ms. Dent, I feel you on this. I absolutely do. He said, but I don't have a relationship with my child. Mom blocked me, and also being incarcerated, which I call geography. If you were overseas, you still can have a relationship, but mom, being the gatekeeper, blocked him. He said, and I always had an issue with paying child support because I feel like it's paying for a car that I can't drive. He said that's the best way that he could sort of get me to understand what that meant. Like, I'm paying this, and I don't it's not tangible. I can't hug and touch it and love it and all of that. And so I totally understand that. And so there is this financial responsibility. And so I do agree, Pate, that this responsible fatherhood, we're trying to switch it out a little bit with healthy fatherhood, because it's like, responsible fatherhood, it could be very insulting because, of course, I'm a responsible father. But I think that if we concentrate on that relationship, that we won't even have to focus so much on the financial, because dads, just like moms, are going to want to see their kids have, right? You're not going to want your kids to go without eating and go without clothes and go without shelter and all the basic needs. But I think the focus should be more so on the relationship, and I think the financial support will just kind of come along. And that's just my experience. I worked in '98 at the local child support office. I had 900 plus families in my caseload. So I know that the back and forth, right? I need my money. I'm looking for a job, Ms. Dent, but my driver's license is suspended, right? And that's what I say about make sense policy. Well, let's put a policy in place that makes it easy for the local agency to reinstate the license so he can go look for a job and not drive without a driver's license, which actually can perpetuate some other things like, felony charges or anything like that. So I'm glad that you kind of honed in on that, because we do collect data with our grantees. We work with the State Office of Child Support to collect aggregate data, and we look at the dads that come in, their child support 3 months before, while they're in the program, and then 3 months post. And so on our 2 most recent annual reports, it does show that 3 months after graduating from the Fatherhood program, that the child support does go up. And so I also want to mention, because I would be remiss if I did not, the Ohio Practitioners Network for Fathers and Families. They help us with collecting other data using efforts to outcomes. And that's how I'm able to produce my annual reports every year. So we use the ETO system to collect all of the data, and then Ohio Practitioners Network, they actually, massage it for us and allow us to present the report.
Is there just one final question before we get to, I know we have 6 minutes before the audience questions start coming in. In terms of modifying their order, is that something that's done in Ohio? I know that in many states, that could be a major barrier, that the orders are not easily modified. Is Ohio one of the states where it's easily modified in order if they're not in a program or if they're in a program?
Right. Well, first of all, the rule is anyone can have a modification on their child support once every 3 years. And if it hasn't been 3 years, there's like 14 other reasons, like, a job layoff or something like that. And right now we're trying to look at expedited because of the unemployment situation, right? And so, yes, one of the big pieces, though, I do want to point out is that we did change a rule that we cannot determine the non-residential parent as being underemployed or unemployed when they're incarcerated, because that really hindered a lot of what we could do on cases of folks that are incarcerated. And that's how those arrears build up, because of course they cannot continue to pay. And so we had sort of this rule that stated, if you're incarcerated, you are voluntarily unemployed or underemployed, because the crime you committed was voluntarily done by you, so therefore you are voluntarily incarcerated. And so that sort of tied the hands on modifying the orders when you're incarcerated, but now that has been changed as well. So yes, we should be right-sizing orders out the gate. So when we're establishing child support, we should right-size them, and then when we're modifying them based on their situation, or if it's 3 years, we should also right-size those orders as well. The ability to pay and stop accumulating all of this child support debt, especially owed to the state.
Thank you. Ryan, I know you were part of the child welfare system, and again, I have another child support related question. Will you charge child support while your child was in your child welfare system?
No.
Ryan?
So my wife and I stayed together. So my wife and I were together when we had our case, and then we remained together. There was a brief period of time where we both went into rehab treatment, and she subsequently went into a recovery home while I, tried to pick up the pieces in my life. But eventually we wound up together. But I do work with incarcerated fathers a lot, and I can't tell you how many of these guys come up to us with notices that they receive regarding their child support, and I know how hard it is, because their instinct is to disappear and run away from it, because it's scary. They don't have the money to pay. They don't know, what their next job will be. So we always encourage them. The first thing to do is definitely respond to the letter. reach out, let them know what your current situation is, that your intent is to be part of your child's life, but your circumstances, currently don't allow it. And so, but yeah, I believe a lot of reform needs to be done. I'm fortunate that that wasn't part of my experience, although it was with my brother. I saw how it pushed him away and how not only did he deal with his license getting suspended, but then he would end up with driving on a suspended license because he was trying to get to a job. And then he would work so long, and then his checks would start getting docked, and so he couldn't make the money to survive, so he would leave the job. And it was like this vicious cycle that occurred really for 18 years until his daughter was, older, and he was able to pay off his arrears. So yeah, it definitely, we need to do some policy change and reform in that area.
And I wanted to comment really quickly.
One thing that I think that, oh, go ahead, Michael. Yes.
Sorry.
Okay.
I just wanted to comment really quickly. As a father, who I've had custody of both of my children since my 25-year-old was 6 months old. And, I got caught up in this pride and ego position of mom had a job. She wasn't engaged with the child. And because of my own pride and my own ego, I didn't ask for child support. I didn't go after child support. Since I have a bunch of researchers here, I would want really curious to know how many fathers who have custody of their children actually go after and pursue child support, because I find in my practice that a lot of the men who have custody make it work, and they don't even consider pursuing. And I will tell you, the one time that I even considered child support, I felt so belittled just by asking the question that I never even reconsidered it.
Mm-hmm. That's a really interesting point you bring up, Michael, regarding the treatment that you were requesting child support as a man who's a father, as a parent. Let's not even go to the word father. You're a parent, and a parent must take care of their child. But based on the heteronormative ways of how we define, and also the way we define masculinity, men are not supposed to ask for anything. And we have these programs where we're hoping that men will come ask for something, and that can help them be all they can be to be a parent and as a citizen of the United States. And that's unfortunate that people bring their own baggage to the job when that's not their position. So this whole idea of street level bureaucrats being fair, again, I'm using an academic term I probably shouldn't use, but those who work on the front lines, those caseworkers, they need to know better. And I'm sorry you went through that. And I applaud you all for all the work you've done, with your children. And I know some of you take care of your nephews. So we all are serving in what is considered a parental role, but often it's not acknowledged. Waldo, do you want to say something? I saw you shaking your head to a couple of things that were said by Ryan and by Michael.
Not so much. I was more so agreeing with the perspectives that they were sharing. I with respect to the whether or not fathers who are custodial fathers seek out child support from the non-custodial parent. A very interesting question. That's not an area of fatherhood that I typically examine, so that you're probably the better person to be able to talk about the degree to which that likely happens. But I would suspect, as Michael has suggested, that is probably, and for the reasons you've identified, David, that is probably something that does not occur that much. First of all, it is still fairly rare that fathers are custodial parents, and if in fact they're a single parent. And so I would also suspect that many of them would operate very similarly to the way in which you identified yourself, Michael, and that probably wouldn't reach out for it. And some of that might be based on the fact that those fathers would view doing so as perhaps being less of a man, but also perhaps to protect themselves from being shamed for seeking help in that particular respect. So there is a lot of work that we have to do around this notion of healthy masculinity. Because I do believe that healthy masculinity is very important in the development of being good fathers or responsible fathers or engaged fathers. Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much.
And David, I wanted to just quickly state, in Ohio, we did take a look at the statistics years ago. It was about 15% of the total cases in the state where we had dads receiving child support. It's really, now it interests me. I probably will circle back and ask the state office if they can run that again, the state office of child support. But it was about 15%. And a lot of times, too, we have to kind of take a look at what's going on in society. With the opioid and drug epidemic in Ohio, we had a lot of kids going either to foster care or going to dad or another, like kinship care. And so, yes, and just to remember, it is child support, so it is for the well-being of the child. And I think, too, how the state calculates it, what they use. In Ohio, we use a shared incomes model, which means her income, his income, and this is what the child benefits from. So.
Excuse me, I supposed to turn my phone off and I didn't do that. I'm sorry. I'm supposed to be the moderator in charge, right? So thank you all for your comments. The one thing, though, I wanted to say to Michael before we take any questions is, one, the work that I do around child support has always been through TANF-affiliated parents. So if a mom received TANF funds, her child support was owned by the state. And then the state decided whether or not she would, generally she, would get a portion of that money or all of that money, and Wisconsin has been one of the few states where we have given 100% pass-through, which means any money collected from the dad, that being generally in this heteronormative way of the father being male, then she would get it. And we did that for a good 10 or so years that we had an ongoing study that looked at how does that work differently. And right now, Wisconsin's one of the states that gives at least 75% of whatever is collected to the mom, the mom generally being the custodial parent. But I know in my own work, when it was the father who was the custodial parent, he often rejected the child support because the mother whom was the other parent generally was just as poor as he was, and he didn't want to put her in harm's way because the money was going to be collected by the state, because the state, when it's a TANF child support order, the state will either keep it or pass it on. And some of the parents in my studies were AFDC parents, it slightly changed after they were TANF, and they didn't want them to have these arrears when they were hoping to help the other parent get on their feet. So there was often things that I would see that could be sanctioned or caught or seen as something illegal, but men tended to not take the money. And now you're making me have to write something I haven't written before. Thank you, Dr. Johnson. There's another paper I have to do. And I should have talked about that more, but it is an important thing, Michael, and I thank you for bringing that up to us. Some of the other things that if you guys had a magic crystal ball, what would the services you want to have offered for men to be able to get the services? What's missing in the work you see, but also what's missing in the programs that you currently operate? What do you need to make your programs even better than they are in other programs you see in your locations or in your research?
So I would love to jump in and tell you that, one of my biggest things is authentic engagement. I feel like a lot of programs have just checked a box. We have a fatherhood program, we're done. And to me, that authentic engagement means just really diving in deep, walking in their shoes. I don't like to use the term meet me where I am. I like to say walk in my shoes, because I think it's really important for us to do that. I feel like a lot of programs are missing that. One of the methods that I think is extremely successful and easy to implement in programs is the peer-to-peer partnerships. Those peer-to-peer mentorships are widely successful because I can relate to somebody who's already been there, right, and who's already walked in my shoes. So I think that's a method, and I think that's something that we should really be putting into practice. It's an easy practice we can do, and it's relatively inexpensive. And believe it or not, I find specifically with men, they're wanting to help another man. Once they've gone through this, they're like, let me help you. Let me find this way, or let me do this. So I think it's an easy method that we should be replicating.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes,
I would
Ryan?
just say,
Waldo, hey, Waldo.
yeah, I would just say mental health services. I absolutely am concerned about the fact being in the midst of a worldwide pandemic, that mental health problems are soaring. And those are, and that's just based on the information that is documented. And when we think about the population of men and their health-seeking behaviors around mental health services and many program services, I think we are challenged to think about the ways in which we can provide those services in perhaps culturally appropriate ways. And when I use the term culturally appropriate, I'm not only thinking in terms of race and ethnicity, but I'm also thinking in terms of gender. Because so many of the ways in which mental health services are structured, they're structured in ways that tend to be more reflective of the ways in which females or women may engage in those services. But I think there is a critical need to expand the range of mental health services that are available to fathers.
We just got a Q&A from somebody out in the audience, and I wanted, before, if we may be able to go back to that question, but I wanted to ask this directed at Kim. So I know Kim's service population is 30% incarcerated men, or men who have been incarcerated. And there was a question about, for men who are incarcerated, how do they seek child support modifications? Is there a clear process for them to do that? And if not, is that a possible policy change in a given state? Kim, can you answer that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't even think it's really a policy change because the policy is already there. I think it's a practice and process change. So there is someone at the State Office of Child Support who is actually assigned to go into every prison to work with them with their cases, as well as receive 4D applications if they want to have paternity established, or if they want to have a modification done, or if we also have a waiver of state owed arrears. I know not every state is doing that, but we actually give counties authority to waive arrears as well. And so that's how I actually ended up in the counties, or in the prisons, because I would go in at first and I would do a PowerPoint to talk to them regarding their role, their important role as dads, even incarcerated, because like I said, it's geography, and how they can have that relationship with their child, and especially when they are returning. And so then my colleague from the State Office of Child Support, she would come right behind me and she would do a child support presentation from establishing paternity to terminating when your children are of age, so forth and so on, and everything in between. And so yes, again, if states do not have, or their child support programs don't have that, they need to figure out a process in order to engage parents that have child support orders in their prisons. And so I don't really think it takes a policy change at all, because the policy is there, giving everyone the right to request a review and adjust, right? The issue was, do we use the state pay, or do you impute income? You should not be imputing income either, because they're not making that wage that they made before they entered into incarceration.
Yes, thank you.
So,
that goes back to something Michael was saying about authenticity. If people really are trying to work with men who identify as a father as well, that you really should be wanting to help and take care of that father, that male, to be able to be a parent. And so I think authenticity is a really important issue. And I couldn't agree more with Waldo around the mental health issue. The whole idea of the provision of mental health services. I think all of us are a little unstable due to this recent pandemic, if we weren't unstable before that. And Dr. Johnson is my go-to therapist as it is. When I need an issue answered, I go to him and ask him for help anytime. And often we don't see men do that. We don't see men lean on other men for assistance. And I'm just so fortunate to have long-term friends like Waldo and others who I can call, and they just listen and say, okay, just look for my fee. in a couple of weeks, or, jokingly. So I don't want to give any encouragement to start being charged for all my calling them for assistance. But Ryan, do you have anything you want to add to, if you had the ideal situation to be able to provide services, what would you recommend or suggest?
Well, I tell you what, I might be a little biased, but like Michael had mentioned earlier, I really feel peer mentorship works really well. Fathers really open up to other fathers who have had similar experiences. I see it when we go into the jails, and we have fathers who go in with us who say, I've been incarcerated right here at this location. I've had an open DCFS case. I know what the situation is like. You immediately see the fathers not only open up, but they start spreading the word, and we're able to help so many more. The problem is recruitment. We just don't have enough peer mentors, and the Department of Children and Family Services is just struggling to be able to hire more peer mentors, and especially in light of the budget cuts that are coming down, I just feel like it's so important and that the investment would pay off in the long run. But we need more peer mentors, and that's what I was going to add.
Thank you so much. One of the questions that have came up is, for those fathers that have been victims of police brutality, has that impacted your conversation in any way for those who are delivering direct services, even collecting data? Has anyone heard from fathers that they've been victims of police brutality or had to deal with police surveillance in some ways that's been heightened?
Well, I will say that we have had that. My Latinos fathers have been having concerns about being deported, and their interactions with law enforcement is always scary and concerning. So, going into the child welfare system, they identify them as police, so that makes that much more difficult for the case to happen, but the true fact of the matter is, and I share this opinion with my Latino brothers and sisters, is, we know what discrimination is. We've seen discrimination. We've seen inhumanity. We've seen our children put in cages, but we still will never know what it's like to be black in America. And we acknowledge that, and we have that conversation. I'm worried about whether I'm going to be harassed when I get pulled over by a cop, but I'm not worried, am I going to get killed? That's not where my mind frame goes. And so it certainly has impacted the conversation, and I'm seeing people being much more real about the reality for us.
And I know that we have 5 minutes left. One thing that I didn't do, which I really wish I had remembered, was that, Kim, in your report, I saw that over 50% of your population are white and fathers. And I generally don't hear any conversation about the challenges or barriers of white men to being a father. And I would recommend that if anyone hasn't had opportunity to go to the website of the Ohio Commission to read their report, and maybe that report will be an opportunity for you to learn more and to contact her. But I think we need to have more conversations about the issues that white men, I'm assuming it's rural county white men, I don't know if it's city, but I would assume it was rural county white fathers are experiencing. So I've been given the cue that it's time for me to move on. But I want to thank Kim, Waldo, Ryan, as well as Michael for this enlightening conversation, and I hope that we get to do it again in the future. This has been fun. And I'll now turn it over to Pasha or Dr. Charles. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, everyone. Again, this is Taha Charles from the School of Social Work at UW-Madison. First and foremost, I want to thank all of our panelists, Mr. Bennett, Ms. Dent, Mr. Huesca, and Dr. Johnson, and of course our moderator, David Pate. Their emails, Dave, if you don't mind pulling up that last slide, their emails will be on the screen in a moment in case you want to contact any of them after the webinar is over. Again, just want to say thank you to the Society for Social Work and Research Special Interest Group that organized this, and again, a special thanks to the Institute for Research on Poverty, and especially Dave Chancellor. Before I pass it over for just a couple of closing comments from my colleague, Dr. Mark Trahan, I just want to make one sort of final comment. You know, for me, one of the big takeaways from today, and this really was the underlying premise of bringing this diverse group of people together to talk about fatherhood. And Dr. Johnson mentioned this in his opening comment, which is that fatherhood is multidimensional in terms of who fathers are, where they live, the role and the kinds of influence they have, and even how they define themselves, as Dr. Pate talked about. And so I'll just say as a closing comment, whether we are people who work in policy, in research, in practice spaces, that I hope, you know, maybe you know, something that we can all take away is that we remember that multidimensional lens as we do our work. It's something certainly that even I sometimes forget to do. And so I just appreciate, you know, people bringing these different perspectives together. And then finally, just to remember that fathers on this coming Father's Day bring so much positivity to their children's lives. They bring strength, they bring commitment, vision, leadership, protection, kindness, laughter, and above all, a lot of love to a lot of kids. And so with that, happy Father's Day, and I'll now turn it over to Dr. Mark Trahan.
Greetings, and thank you to all of you for joining us for this fantastic webinar today. And my name is Dr. Mark Trahan. I'm at the School of Social Work at Texas State University. I'm also the co-chair with Dr. Atima Doyle of the Fatherhood-related Research Special Interest Group for the Society for Social Work and Research. I'd like to just take a minute to thank Dr. Pate Charles, please. She has done a magnificent job of organizing this event. So thank you, Dr. Charles, for your efforts in leading this. I'd also like to amend a statement that was made earlier in the webinar that if you would like to be added to the Fatherhood-related Research Special Interest Group email list, please email me directly. My email is mark, M-A-R-K, Trahan, T-R-A-H-A-N, at txstate.edu. That information is located down in your email list and technical help. So if you would like to email me, feel free to email me directly, and you'll be placed on that list. Lastly, I want to thank the Institute for the Research on Poverty for their sponsorship for this event. Many thanks to all of you for participating today. Thank you so much for joining us in this critical dialogue about fatherhood, perspectives, research, social work practice, and public policy. If you would like to get a recording of this session, it's going to be made available to you if you signed up at the beginning to receive a copy. You'll receive a link to this webinar. You may also check with the Institute for Research on Poverty's YouTube channel. It will be posted there as well. And we want to thank you for joining us and appreciate your time. And thank you to all of our panelists. Take care. Have a wonderful Father's Day and stay safe. And we'll be thinking about you, and take care. Bye-bye.